Have the police ever had to come to your house? Recently, as in last weekend, I came home mid-afternoon to a few cop cars and big armored vehicle parked outside my house. Walk up to the detective at the door knowing I haven't done anything wrong and ask what they are doing. Apparently, my neighbor behind my house and across the alley was wanted for robbing a couple banks a few years ago, so they wanted to use my backyard to stage their surprise entrance on her house. It was kind of fun to watch, to be honest, and they were really nice and cool about everything.
That's interesting. Seems like your weekend turned into a little adventure. Witnessing something like that right in your backyard must have been unexpected. It's nice the officers kept it professional and friendly. Not every day you get to see a police operation up close. Just hope your neighbor wasn't up to anything too serious.
They were here 2 weeks ago. My teenage son dropped his wallet in town, and some rather nice person handed it in. The cop went to the library to get his address of the card and brought it out to the house. We weren't in, so he left a card, then offered to come back out to the house with it. Since I thought enough time had been spent on it, I refused his offer and went to the station to pick it up.
It's nice to hear that people can be decent. Losing a wallet can be a hassle, but getting it back feels good. The cop going out of his way to help is a solid move too. It's funny how things like this remind you that there are still good people out there. Sometimes it's just easier to handle things yourself, but it's cool he was willing to help.
My neighbor once called the cops on me because they thought I was selling drugs. I live in a very nice area, have a few nice cars, but work from home as a financial consultant, so I have clients coming and going from my house a lot. I, on the other hand, hardly leave, which I guess led the neighborhood to think I'm a drug dealer. Edit. Spelling.
That's a funny situation. It's wild how people jump to conclusions based on what they see. You were just doing your job, and they couldn't connect the dots. The nice cars probably didn't help either. I guess in a quiet neighborhood, anything out of the ordinary raises eyebrows. It's good that the truth came out eventually, though. Always keep them guessing, I guess.
Yup, cops came to our house because of a complaint that we were devil worshippers making animal sacrifices. At the time I was a teenager and home alone. When the cops showed up, they asked me some seemingly odd questions about who lived in the house, what we did there, etc. I was confused, but gave them the normal answers: my family, we live there, etc. Soon they got to the point and asked about animal cruelty, which completely confused me. Long story short, my dad is a hunter and recently came back with a bag of geese, or quail, I forget. He went onto the back deck to feather and butcher them. He either got distracted or lazy, because he left a bunch of feathers, blood, and animal carcasses on the deck, and then left the house. Soon after, the electric meter reader guy came to do his thing, stumbled upon the gruesome scene, squealed like a little girl, I assume, and called the 5-0 to report us as fans of the Dark Lord. In the end, the cops laughed about it.
That's a wild story. I can just picture the cops showing up, thinking they stumbled onto something crazy. It's funny how things get blown out of proportion. It's like one little mess leads to a whole investigation. The meter reader must have had a heart attack seeing that. In the end, at least it turned into a laugh for the cops. Just another day in suburban life, I guess.
The police seemed to be at my house every other week when I was growing up. Both of my older brothers discovered the world of drugs when they were in high school. I'm not talking about pot. I'm talking pills, coke, meth, etc. One of them would come home high as hell, then start beating on someone in the family, usually my mom, then my dad would intervene. Dad and whichever brother was the dumbass of the week would get into what could only be described as a street fight, and shortly after the cops would show up. I hated my childhood because of my brothers. One of them got clean about 8 years ago. He's now married with 2 kids, and I have a pretty decent relationship with him. I'm afraid the other one will never change. He's nothing but a liar and a thief, and I'll never trust him again. As far as I'm concerned, seeing him at Thanksgiving and Christmas is too much.
That sounds tough. Growing up in that environment can really mess with you. It's good to hear that one of your brothers turned things around and is doing well now. It's hard to cut ties with someone you cared about, but sometimes you have to protect yourself from the chaos they bring. Family can be complicated, and it's okay to set boundaries for your own peace of mind.
Runaway dog got brought home by the cops. Twice. And being a Canadian from a rural area, I would use the cops as free cabs all the time when I was younger. "Excuse me, officer. I'm drunk, can get a hold of a cab, and don't want to drive drunk. Can you give me a ride? You know, kid, we're not a fucking cab service. Where do you live? About 4 clicks up the road. Hop and work like a charm."
That's a classic small-town situation. The cops stepping in to help out, even if they're not supposed to be a taxi service. I can relate to those moments when you push your luck a bit, thinking it'll work out. It seems like a lot of those adventures happen when you're younger, just trying to figure things out. At least you made it home safe, which is all that really matters in the end.
My dad has schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. Imagine an unholy hybrid of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and you've got it. When I was a young kid, the police were regular visitors, looking for my dad after a rampage, returning him home, checking up on us, etc. It's amazing what you get used to, and I've never been frightened of cops. They always had my back.
That sounds pretty tough. Growing up in that environment definitely shapes your perspective. It's interesting how you found a sense of security in the police rather than fear. It seems like you've adapted to a lot at a young age. It's cool that you can look back and see the good in a situation that many might find overwhelming.
Family and I were away on vacation, and my uncle stopped by our house to drop something off. He had a key to get in, but not a passcode for the home security system that was very much set. Normally, this wouldn't have been an issue, as one phone call from the security company to one of us would have cleared it all up, except we were in mid-flight with our phones turned off. And my uncle already has a criminal record. Alarms went off, cops show up, nobody goes fucking anywhere until they got a hold of us about a half hour later. Thankfully after that it got resolved, but damn, my uncle was shaken.
That's a wild situation. Your uncle must have been stressed out dealing with the cops, especially with his past. It's good that everything got sorted out eventually. Just a reminder of how technology can complicate simple things. Vacations are supposed to be relaxing, not filled with unexpected drama. Hope the rest of the trip went smoothly after that.
Not me, but my sister. She and her boyfriend were renting a house while going to college. Her boyfriend is really big into sustainable agriculture and ways to grow produce quickly and efficiently. He had a small hydroponic system in a walk-in closet. It turns out police in my sister's area use heat imaging to find people growing weed with hydroponic systems. So one day my sister and her boyfriend get a knock on the door, and the police ask if they can look around her house. My sister lets them in, and they go straight to the closet where they find the biggest damn eggplants they've ever seen. They then thank my sister and leave embarrassed. TLDR police try to bust my sister for growing weed and instead find eggplant and an embarrassing lack of illegal activity.
That's kind of funny. Your sister must have been a bit shocked when the police showed up. Imagine the look on their faces when they saw those giant eggplants instead of anything illegal. Just goes to show how assumptions can lead to some awkward moments. At least it turned out harmless, and somewhat amusing for everyone involved. Makes for a good story to tell later on.
My friend dared me to run up my hill naked. Police were in the park opposite my house, investigating an unrelated issue. Police officer sees me and starts running after me. I run into house, and police officer spends the night banging on the door. Next day, I come home after school and see the police officer. He told my mom, "Cue beating."
That's a wild story. It's pretty funny how a dare turned into a full-on chase. The police showing up made it way more serious than it should have been. And then having to face your mom? That's rough. You probably learned a lesson there about dares. Sometimes it's just better to keep your clothes on and think things through before acting.
When my husband was in grad school, I cleaned houses to keep us afloat. One night, we had a local detective show up at our door. He told us one of my clients had an expensive ring go missing and asked if he could search our apartment. We thought about not letting him in, but we had nothing to hide, and we really didn't want any more attention from the police than necessary. We let him do a cursory search. Honestly, he basically just came in, looked around a bit in the living room, and left. He called the next day to say my client had found her ring. I called the client and told her I would not be returning to clean her house. She apologized and begged me to come back. I'm an excellent cleaner. I told her I was sorry, but I could not work for someone who did not trust me in their home.
That's an interesting situation. It must have felt strange having a detective at your door. It's good you stood your ground. Trust is important in those jobs. Sounds like that client didn't realize how hard it is to find someone reliable. Sometimes you just have to prioritize your integrity over money, even if it's tough. At least you know your worth when it comes to cleaning.
When I was in my mid-20s, my uncle upgraded his HD projector and gave me the old one. So for Halloween, we haul it out into the parking lot and start playing the abominable Dr. Phibbs on the side of our apartment complex so that the passing foot traffic could see. Later in the night, we got bored and hooked up Guitar Hero. Around 11:30, a cop car rolls up, and the cops get out and tell us that there's been a noise complaint. The entire time he's talking to me, he's kind of looking up at this 2-story projection and was really cool about the whole thing. The conversation went something like this: "We can turn it off and take it in, officer." "Oh, you don't have to do that. They were saying it was primarily just the bass, so if you dial it back, you should be fine." Zid eyes the officer suspiciously. "Do you want to play?" Officer gives a long, hard look at the setup. "Sorry, I'm on duty."
That's a wild Halloween night. It's cool how you set up the projector for everyone to enjoy, even catching a cop's attention. The way he handled the noise complaint seems pretty chill. And offering him to play Guitar Hero? That's bold. It's nice to see moments like that where people can connect over something fun, even in unexpected situations. Makes you think about how a simple setup can turn into a good memory.
So this happened a few years ago. My family and I had recently moved to the States, and before this point had never had a smoke detector in our kitchen. Don't ask me why, I have no idea, it seems silly to me now. As such, we had no idea how temperamental they were, or what one going off actually meant. One day my mom was cooking a type of orange chicken over the stove, in a pot that was too small for the amount of stock she had put in. As a result, the pot boiled over considerably and set off the smoke alarm. We, never having heard that blood-curdling sound before, were both shocked and frightened, and in a moment of idiocy, we decided it was a good idea to call 911 and ask them how to turn off the smoke alarm. Well, 4 cop cars, 2 fire trucks, and a good laugh later, we never made that mistake again.
That's quite the experience. Moving to a new place can be overwhelming. Your mom probably just wanted to whip up a nice meal, and then the smoke alarm goes off. Calling 911 for help with a smoke detector seems like a classic rookie move. At least you got a story out of it, and I bet the fire and police crew had a good laugh too. Now you know to check the pot size before cooking.
To take my white, middle-class father in for questioning under the Terrorism Act. A pair of peregrine falcons were nesting on a nearby police station, so he decided to sit in his car with a pair of binoculars and watch them for an hour or so while my mom was doing some shopping. Instead of just approaching him, they traced his registration plate and showed up in the early hours of the morning the next day. He's been asked not to do it again unless he goes in and tells the officers in the station first.
That's an interesting situation. Just sitting in the car with binoculars can look suspicious. It's funny how the police reacted though. It seems they went way overboard for something pretty harmless. At least now he knows the drill if he wants to birdwatch again. I guess the world is a bit on edge these days.
While I was living in Georgia, I got a knock on the door on a Saturday morning by a correctional officer with a shotgun out. It turns out he was in charge of the chain gang and asked to use our outside water tap so the prisoners could get a drink. I of course agreed. As the day went on, the heat got worse and the humidity was unbearable. I had some leftover bags of ice and some powdered pink lemonade I took out with some plastic cups and gave them to the officer, which he gave out to the prisoners. They thanked me by trimming some bushes and edged my lawn.
That's an interesting story. Just a normal Saturday turning into something unexpected. It's cool that you helped out and they showed their appreciation in a practical way. Seems like a good example of how little acts can lead to something helpful. Not a bad trade-off for some lemonade.
My man was getting a splinter out of my little brother's hand when I wax about 4. Being the responsible elder sibling, I decided to call the police, and all they heard was a child screaming down the phone with me calling for help. About 5 squad cars turned up 10 minutes later demanding that my ma'am got on the floor and put her hands on her head. This is a story that is brought up at most family get-togethers nowadays.
That's a wild story. It's funny how things can get out of hand so quickly. You were just trying to help, and it turned into a scene. Family gatherings can bring up the craziest memories like that. It's good to laugh about it now, even if it was chaotic then. Being the older sibling has its challenges, but at least you have a funny story to tell.
During a snowstorm, I, my wife, and her cousin were at a party at a friend's place, under 1 kilometer from home. Police showed up around 2 a.m. due to noise complaint. Party quieted down, but that was our cue to leave. Started getting ready to walk home, and the officer gave the old, "You aren't driving tonight, are you?" line. "No, sir. Just live down the road." He decided we were too drunk to walk in a storm and offered to give us a lift. We gratefully accepted. We pulled into the driveway, and I said something to the effect of, "Great. Now the neighbors will gossip about us being brought home in a cop car." Cop grins and says, "You want the lights?" Me, "Fuck yeah." He lit up the blue and reds and hit the siren for a sec just for good measure. Edit. Typo.
That's a pretty chill story. You're just trying to get home after a party, and the cop steps in. It's cool how he offered you a ride instead of a lecture. Then, when you jokingly mention the neighbors gossiping, he plays along and even turns on the lights. It's nice when a situation turns a little funny rather than awkward. Definitely a ride you'll remember, even with the snowstorm outside.
My neighbor got super drunk and started pulling out his guns, threatening to shoot his wife, etc. Cops got called, SWAT team came. Cops come to my house to ask us to leave for a while because bullets can go through your walls. No shots were fired. The situation resolved itself when he, in a wife beater and boxer shorts, walked onto his front porch with a bottle of Jack and a .357 yelling, "You'll never take me alive." The cops tackled him. A month later, him and his wife moved to Florida.
That sounds pretty intense. I can't imagine dealing with something like that right next door. It's good that no one got hurt, though. Just a wild night in the neighborhood, I guess. I wonder how they adjusted after moving to Florida. Hopefully, things are calmer for everyone now.
I had a neighbor who absolutely hated us. We were 3 21-year-olds and had just purchased the condo. Well, the neighbor proceeded to call the cops on us every other day. About the 3rd time the police came, it was just us 3 watching cops. Yep, the cops showed up while we were watching cops. They got a good chuckle out of that. After a few weeks of coming out, and now knowing all the different cops on a first-name basis, they finally went to the neighbors and asked the neighbors to stop wasting their time.
That's a classic situation. You just wanted to enjoy your new place, and the neighbor made it a bit of a joke. Having the cops show up while watching a cop show is a funny coincidence. At least the officers can have a laugh about it. It's good to know they stepped in eventually and talked to the neighbor. Sometimes, people just need to lighten up.
Twice when I lived in my previous apartment. 1. My car matched the description of a vehicle involved in a hit and run. They just wanted to take a look to see if it had any damage. 2. We asked them to come when a drunk college girl was walking into random apartments, peed on our steps, and, when she didn't recognize anyone in any of the apartments she walked into, remained standing and shivering near our dumpster in sub-freezing temperatures with no winter coat on. Edit. Cars don't match my description. I am human.
Not much happened in that apartment. The cops showed up twice, once for my car. They thought it was involved in a hit and run. That was awkward. The second time was rough. Some girl was wandering around, just peeing everywhere and not realizing where she was. She ended up by the dumpster, freezing without a coat. Guess that's apartment life. Just weird times making memories.
My parents were on vacation, and I got back from college a week early, so naturally my girlfriend came over. The neighbors saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway and called the cops. I answered the door in my underwear with my girlfriend standing on the stairs half naked. Cop gave me an approving nod and told me to have a good night. All was well in the end.
That's a pretty wild situation. Honestly, I can't believe the cop was chill about it. Most times, you'd expect a lecture or something. But it sounds like you handled it well. Definitely an interesting welcome home from college. Not the worst way to kick off some quality time, I guess. Just another story to laugh about later.
A neighbor girl was raising money for DARE, and so my mom wrote her a check for $5. It was the 90s. A few days later, an officer shows up at our door because the check was written as $15 in numbers, but $5 was written out in words. Apparently, the neighbor girl changed the check from $5 to $15 to try to raise a little more money. Brilliant.
That's an interesting story. Just shows how things can go sideways with money. Kids can be pretty creative when it comes to fundraising. I guess she thought nobody would notice. It's kind of funny to think about, but I can see how it led to that awkward encounter with the officer. Makes you wonder how often that kind of thing actually happens.
Oh yes. Back in 1991 when we lived in a shithole basement flat with no phone. My husband fell asleep on the last train home from work and ended up in the middle of nowhere, Bridgend actually. He left the station to find the nearest police station to see if they could get a message to me. Then he spent a very long cold night on the station platform. It was February. Meantime, the police appeared on my doorstep at 12:30 in the morning to tell me my husband was a twat. Safe, but still a twat.
That's a wild story. I can picture him waking up and realizing he's totally lost. The train rides can be long, but getting stuck in the middle of nowhere just makes it worse. The police showing up to tell you that sounds like a scene from a comedy. At least he was safe, but yeah, falling asleep on the train might not be the best idea.
Yes. Police come over to my house all the time, practically every day. It's gotten so bad that whenever I'm home, there's always an officer around, watching me and waiting for me to mess up. An officer just lets himself into my house, eats my dinners, and tells me what to do. When I stay out too late, an officer calls me and tells me to get back home, or else. It's gotten to the point where sometimes an officer has to drive me to school. Well, I guess that's what happens when your dad is a cop.
That sounds pretty intense. Having police constantly around must feel strange, like you're always under a microscope. It's kind of wild how your dad's job affects your daily life so much. Getting driven to school by an officer is something I can't imagine experiencing. I guess it's a unique situation, but it probably gets annoying too. Just trying to have a normal life with all that happening must be tough.
Yes. I bought a cell phone off Kijiji, and it turns out the person I bought it from robbed a store with his friends, and my phone was one of the phones stolen. Clearly, I had no idea. They brought me in for questioning and everything. I was 16, 17, so my dad was there too. Back then I deleted all my emails, and I felt so bad that I couldn't give them any information. I haven't deleted an email since, and I discovered the archive function. They asked why I didn't inquire more about the origins of the phone. He said he got it for Christmas and didn't need it, which drove me nuts. What am I supposed to do? Interrogate the guy. Ugh, my phone got taken away. Although I had custom housing on it, so I just gave them the skeleton of the phone with no housing. They gave me a weird look. Shrug side note, everyone I've told this story to who is skeptical of Kijiji, Craigslist/eBay has always said told you so. I bought a ton of phones off there before, and this was just one bad experience. All in all, it's great. There are sketchy people out there, but most of them are normal.
That's a wild story. Buying a phone online can be risky, but it sounds like you handled it pretty well for being so young. Getting pulled in for questioning must have been stressful. It's funny how a single bad experience can stick with you, but it makes sense to be more cautious after that. Glad it didn't stop you from using those platforms, though. Just shows that you have to be careful out there.
A couple I was living with was going through a messy divorce at the end of it. One moved out but got enraged and tried to break in, slamming the glass doors, etc. It was scary. The other called the cops, so they showed up a few minutes after he got there. Broke it up. Was sad. They're good friends, and I love them to death. I never saw that coming.
It's wild how quickly things can turn south. I remember a time when my friends were having issues, and it got pretty heated. Someone wound up calling the cops too because it just spiraled out of control. It's tough seeing people you care about go through that. You think you know someone, and then they surprise you. I guess life has its way of throwing curveballs.
Oh yeah, noise complaints galore in my college days. Had my house broken into once, they came for that. Moved into a townhome a few years back, and we had a party with a bunch of people out front. Local PD rolled through, saw us, got out, and we're all, hey guys, just a heads up, we haven't gotten any complaints yet, but the neighbors here aren't chill at all, so rage on all you want, but if we get called out tonight, be cool about it.
Sounds like you had quite the college experience. Those noise complaints can be a hassle. It's interesting how the police showed up but were pretty chill about it. They probably knew what to expect from parties. It's good they gave you the heads up. Living next to neighbors who aren't cool with noise can really change the vibe. At least you got to enjoy the party without immediate worry.
Police officer came to my house at 8 a.m. in college because apparently the neighbors were complaining of a dog whining all night. I didn't hear shit, but whatever. Officer Dick questioned me, asked me multiple times if it was my dog and how I couldn't hear it barking. I don't know, maybe because I'm on the first floor and the dog's on the third? He gave me his card to give to my roommate. Shortly after a blowout, said dog left and went to live with roommate's parents. Cool, he hates it here. Edited. Remembered another time. I was home from college and a police officer came knocking on the door because a school bus driver said that someone was throwing rocks or something at her bus around where my house is. The officer asked me if I knew what he was talking about, and I said no. I then proceeded to tell him that I'm 19 and in college, and asked him if I looked like someone who would throw stuff at school buses. That's when my dad came to the door and told me to leave. I doubt anyone did anything. We live on a quiet street.
That sounds like a pretty weird morning. Dealing with police over a dog you didn't even hear must have been pretty annoying. And the school bus thing? I guess it's just a typical day on a quiet street. Can't imagine being thought of as a troublemaker at 19. Hopefully, your dad handled it better than you did. Just minor inconveniences, I suppose. At least those stories are kind of funny in hindsight.
Got a call at 3 a.m. from the police saying there was a break-in, but nothing was taken. Come back to the house to find our cat, that we put in the basement when we left, at the top of the stairs near the entrance to the house. Nothing was taken or broken. Only explanation is the cat opened the door. Set off the motion detector. The police probably came and scared the crap out of our cat. TLDR. Put cat in basement before going on vacation. Cat opened door like a velociraptor. Set off motion detector. Police came and scared crap out of the cat.
That sounds like quite the night. Just imagine the cat figuring it out like some little criminal mastermind. You think it was all chill until the police showed up. I bet it was just trying to see what was going on, but then freaked out. Cats really do have a knack for getting into places they shouldn't. Glad nothing was taken though. Just a wild night for everyone involved.
You had to shut down a party I had once. They found one of my dumbass friends passed out on my side yard in his own vomit, and they called the paramedics for him. Super overdramatic in every way possible. To make it worse, some stupid guy drove his car into a fence, leaving my party drunk. I never got in trouble for that, thankfully. The lesson is for the people reading this and living in suburbia. Don't let parties bleed outside, and don't leave your music volume accessible to anyone.
Yeah, that sounds like a wild night. It's always the friends who cause chaos. It's crazy how one person can mess things up for everyone. The drunk driving incident is a big reminder of how important it is to keep things safe. Definitely learned some good lessons about managing parties after that. Keeping it low-key is probably the way to go if you don't want to deal with the drama.
On several occasions, police have come to where I was staying. First, Grandma's house. Little cousin picked up a phone and dialed 911. They came to make sure everything was okay. Second, friend's house. We had been prank calling our friend, and his dad called the cops on us. Third, my house. Brother got jumped. Officer came to do follow-up questions.
It's interesting how these things happen. I remember a time at my grandma's when my little cousin accidentally called 911. The police showed up just to check on us. Then, at a friend's place, we were prank calling and got his dad so upset that he called the cops. Finally, there was a serious moment when my brother got jumped, and the officer came by for questions. Just wild times.
When I was around 15, I was asleep in my room around 1 a.m. I had left a light on in my room. The cop had thought someone was up, and since the room was a living room converted to bedroom, I hear someone open the door very loudly. Half asleep, I see a tall guy in a bulletproof vest and cop hat. We just kind of stare at each other for a second before he asks what room my dad is sleeping in. I calmly tell him he's sleeping in a room at the end of the hall. He says thanks and goes to wake up my dad to respond to a case. I go back to sleep before I realize what just happened. Woke up the next day, my mom telling me a cop had just walked into the house and woke up Dad. I told her, yeah, I know he had to ask me for directions. Parents joked for a while that someone could have broken in and murdered them. I would have given directions before going back to bed. That's how we got 2 new dogs.
That's a wild story. You wake up to a cop in your room, and all you can do is give directions. It's crazy to think about what could have happened, but it's funny in a way. Your parents must have been freaked out, and getting 2 new dogs is a nice way to feel safer. It's one of those moments you look back on and just shake your head. Life is weird like that.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.